Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Henry Q. Wifflebottom, and I'm here to read you some literary treats. The first book we'll be reading is by an author called James Barclay. The book's titled Dawnthief. Isolated, betrayed, facing the end. The Raven, 6 men and an elf, swords for hire in the wars that have torn apart Balea. For years their loyalty has been only to themselves and their code. How is it then that they are now fighting for the Dark College of Magic, searching for the location of Dawnthief, a spell to end the world, a spell that must be cast? Let me introduce you to the cast of characters who make up the Raven. We have Hyrid Coldheart, the barbarian warrior, Ras, Richmond, Talon, Serindalan, the unknown warrior, and Ilka, the Gelatsan mage. Prologue. The hand over her mouth stifled her screams as she awoke. Beside her in the bed, Alun was still. A face, shadowed by night, leaned into hers. She could make out his lean features and hard eyes. The hand pressed harder as her eyes bored into his. If you cast, your boys will die. If you struggle, your boys will die. If you don't cooperate, your boys will die. Your husband will remain as witness that we can take your kind from anywhere, even from the heart of a college city. Think on that while you sleep and curb your anger when you awake. We have a great deal to talk about. The thoughts crashed through her mind in time with the hammering of her heart. Her foolish determination to live a quiet life outside of the security of the college walls had put in jeopardy everything she loved. The man had mentioned her boys, her beautiful twin sons in whom she had so much faith and nurtured such great power. So young, so innocent. Her body quailed as she fought against the thought of what men such as these might do. They had no compassion. They saw what they believed to be evil and had vowed to destroy it. They didn't see the purity and the magic of what she was creating, and their blindness made them so dangerous. Voices struck notes of caution in her mind. The masters of the college, who had sympathized with her desire for family life, but had warned against the complacency of comfort in times when people could be open in their animosity towards the college and all for which it stood. Hers was an experiment. The masters had reminded her it was not a simple desire to settle down. Her children were children of the college, they had said, and their development was critical research. But, as usual, she had had her way. After all, they were her sons, and Alun had no wish to live in the college. She cursed herself for her stubborn stupidity and for her overconfidence in her ability to keep them all safe. Tears of frustration and anger welled up, but they, like the voices of the masters in her head, were echoes of warnings that were ignored too long and were heeded too late. The man's other hand came across her vision. It was clutching a cloth which he pressed against her nose and mouth. The drug took swift effect, and her struggle was that of an animal caught in a trap as the dogs close in. Futile, desperate, short. Profane. The last thought through her mind was how ill she would feel when she opened her eyes. Chapter 1. Blue light seared across the late afternoon sky, flaring against the broken low cloud and throwing the sheer opening of Tarrenspike Pass into sharp relief. A heavy explosion sounded. Men screamed. The Raven made a calm assessment of the situation, looking out from the castle which controlled the pass, across the courtyard and onto the battlefield from their vantage point, high up on the keep. The left-hand end of the defensive line had been shattered. Bodies, burning and broken, were scattered across scorched grass, and the enemy redoubled their efforts all along the battlefront. They surged. "Damn it," said the unknown warrior. "Trouble." He raised a clenched fist above his head, spread his fingers, then whirled his arm in a wide circle. Instantly, the flagman in the turret signalled the order. 5 cavalrymen. Cavalrymen. There we go. There you go. Cavalrymen. And a mage galloped out of a side gate. There. Look. Hyrod pointed towards the devastated line. Perhaps 15 men were running through the gap, ignoring the battle as they rushed towards the castle walls. Are we in? He asked. We're in, said the unknown. 'Bout time, Hyrod smiled. Raven! Roared the unknown. Raven with me! He swept his two-handed sword from the scabbard leaning against the ramparts and charged over the steps, chestplate catching the dying rays of the sun, his massive frame moving with a speed and agility that remained a fatal surprise to many, and his shaven head bobbing on his bull neck as he started down at a dead run. The stairs led down from the ramparts along the inside of the wall before joining the roof of the keep. From there, the way to the courtyard was through either one of the 2 turrets and down the spiral stairways. The unknown led the 6 leather and chain-clad warriors and 1 mage who made up the Raven to the left-hand turret, threw the door open, barked the guard aside, took the stairs 2 at a time, leaning into the outside wall to steady himself. Halfway down, a second, bigger explosion sounded, shaking the castle foundations. They're through the courtyard wall, said Hyrod. Almost there, said the unknown. The door at the base of the turret was open, and Hyrod doubted whether the unknown would have paused had it been closed, such was his speed. The Raven sprinted out into the waning amber sunlight and headed for the left-hand corner of the courtyard where dust from the explosion filled the air. From the fog of the dust and picking their way through the rubble they'd created came the enemy. The warriors, leather-armoured and cloth-masked, spread into the courtyard. Behind them, Hyrod could see another making his way through the debris, seemingly at leisure. He too was wearing shining leather armour, but also a black cloak that billowed behind him. A pipe smoked gently in his mouth, and if Hyrod's eyes didn't deceive him, he was stroking a cat whose head poked out from the neck of the cloak. Behind him he heard Ilka, the elven mage from Gelatza, curse and spit. Zetex. Hyrod paused in his stride and glanced back. Ilka waved him on. Get on and fight, said the elf, his tall, athletically slim frame tense, his flat, oval hazel eyes narrowed beneath short dark hair. I'll keep an eye on him. The enemy fighting men began to move to the Raven's left at an even pace, trotting towards the bare rock wall along the base of which grain, tool, and firewood sheds ran the outer defences to keep. The unknown warrior immediately changed direction, cutting off the new approach. Hyrod frowned, unable to take his eyes from the solitary black-cloaked figure behind the swordsman. The sounds of battle from outside the wall began to fade as Hyrod focused on the task ahead. Seeing them, the enemy, who outnumbered the Raven by almost 3 to 1, moved to intercept. 5 warriors were ahead of the main group, running on, swords held high, shouts ringing from the walls as they came, confident in their numerical superiority. Form up! Shouted the unknown, and the Raven switched seamlessly into their fighting line as they advanced. As always, the unknown himself took the centre of a slight-angled and uneven chevron. To his left ranged Talon, Ras, and Richmond, and to his right, Surinder and Hyrod. Behind them, Ilka prepared the defensive shield. The unknown tapped the point of his 2-handed blade rhythmically on the ground with each pace, and Hyrod, searching for recognition in the eyes of their adversaries, bared his teeth as he found it, noting the ghost of a break in their stride. Shield up, said Ilka. It sent a shiver through Hyrod even now, 10 years on. And the reality was that he couldn't actually feel anything. But it was there, a net of security from magical attack, a momentary shimmering in the air. The unknown ceased tapping his sword point, and a beat later, the Raven joined battle. The unknown brought his sword up in a right-to-left arc, making a nonsense of his opponent's defense. The man's blade was knocked aside and his face split from chin to forehead, blood spraying up from the unknown's weapon as it exited. The man was hurled backwards, crashing into 2 of his colleagues, not even raising a scream as he died. To the right, Surinder caught a blow on his kite shield before sweeping his sword through the enemy's rib cage, and Hyrod evaded a clumsy overhead with ease, swaying right, then jabbing two-handed into the neck of his opponent. Others were hesitant to fill the gap. The barbarian fighting man grinned and stepped forward, beckoning them on with a hand. To the unknown's left, the going was less straightforward. Ras and Talon were trading blows with competent shield-bearing warriors, while Richmond, distracted, was on the defensive, his quick fluid strikes causing his enemy great difficulty nonetheless. "Spellcaster moving, our left," he said. He parried a blow to his midriff and shoved his opponent back. "I have him," said Ilka, his voice distant with the effort of maintaining the shield. "He's casting." "Leave him to Ilka," ordered the unknown. His blade thudded against the shield of an enemy. The man staggered. "Still moving left," said Richmond. "Leave him," the big man said, slashing open the stomach of the man in front of him as Talon, immediately adjacent, finished his first victim, taking a cut on his arm. The enemy mage barked a command word. Heat scorched the air, and in the moment's ensuing silence, both sides paused, falling back half a pace. "Ward!" yelled the mage, and buildings along the back wall exploded, clouding the air with splinters and hurling broken planks to spin and tumble across the courtyard. Chaos. Half a plank thumped into Hirad's standing foot. His balance gone, he sprawled forwards, trying to turn onto his back even as he fell. To his left, the unknown took the force of the explosion on his broad back with barely a flinch. Thundering his blade through waist high, he cut the man in front of him clear through to the spine. "Shield down!" shouted Ilka. The shock of the detonation had pitched him to the dirt, breaking his concentration. He was up on his feet immediately. "I'll take the mage." "I've got him!" Richmond, who had all but fallen into his opponent's arms, recovered the quicker of the two and rammed his sword into the man's midriff. He turned from the battle. "Stay in line!" roared the unknown. "Richmond, stay in line!" Hirad was staring straight into the eyes of the man who was about to kill him. Hardly believing his luck, the man swung his sword towards the helpless barbarian, but the blow never reached its target. Instead, it clattered against a kite shield. Legs straddled Hirad, and Surinder's sword uppercut into the man's neck. Surinder stooped and helped Hirad clear. The half-dozen paces Richmond took away from the line before he realized his error were fatal. Ras, engaged with one man, was not aware that his left flank was totally exposed. Seizing his chance, the second enemy stepped quickly around his companion and buried his sword in the Raven warrior's side. Ras grunted and collapsed, clutching at the wound as blood soaked through his armor, falling against Talon's legs with enough force to unbalance his friend. Talon just about defended one strike, but was in no position to avoid the next. "Shit!" rasped the unknown. He set his blade horizontally across Talon's path, fielding two blows aimed at the struggling warrior, and kicked out straight with his right foot, connecting with his opponent's lower abdomen. Richmond crashed back into battle. At the same time, Talon recovered to stand across the stricken Raven man, skewering another enemy through the chest and wrenching his blade free, the man's screams turning to gurgles as he drowned in his own blood. And behind the battle, Ilka could only watch as the Zetek's mage, running towards the wall he'd exposed by destroying the wooden buildings, paused, turned to him, smiled, said one word, and disappeared on his next pace forward. Ilka gritted his teeth and switched his attention back to the fight. Ras was lying curled and motionless. The unknown hacked down another man, and to his right, Surinder and Hirad killed with practiced efficiency. Only Richmond's blade flailed, the whole set of his body giving away his feelings. Ilka strode forwards, forming the mana shape for a holding spell. It was enough. The remains of the enemy unit saw him, disengaged, and ran back the way they had come. "Forget them," said the unknown, as Hirad made to chase the fleeing enemy. The barbarians stopped and watched them go, hearing the jeers of the castle garrison help them on their way. Elsewhere, cheers rose from the ramparts as horns sounded retreat across the battleground. For the Raven, victory was hollow. A pool of silence spread across the courtyard from where they stood, and as it reached out, others fell quiet, turning to see what few had ever seen. When Hirad looked around, all but Ilka were crouched by Ras. Hirad joined them. He opened his mouth to ask the question, but swallowed his words hard. Ras, his hand still clamped to the horrible wound in his side, was not breathing. "All day sitting around, and now this," said Hired. "We're never taking a reserve force job again." "I don't think this is the time or the place for this discussion," said the unknown softly. He was aware of a crowd beginning to gather. "Why not?" Hired rose, arm muscles bunching beneath his heavy padded leather armour, his braided russet hair bouncing as he jerked to his feet. He rammed his sword back into its scabbard. "How much more evidence do we bloody well need? If you spend a day up on the ramparts, you aren't sharp enough when it comes to the fight." "There's a few here that wouldn't agree with you," snapped the unknown, gesturing at the slain enemy. "We've lost 3 men in 10 years, all of them in contracts we shouldn't have taken on. We should be hired to fight, not to sit around watching others do it." "This was a good money contract," said Ilka. "Do you think Ras cares?" shouted Harrod. Began Ilka. He put a hand to his head, his eyes losing focus. He squeezed the unknown's shoulder. "This discussion and the vigil will have to wait. The mage is still in there," he said. The Raven were on their feet in a moment, each man ready. "Where?" growled Harrod. "He's a dead man." "I can't see him," said Ilka. "He's under a cloaked walk. He's close by, though. I can sense the mana shape." "Great," said Surinder. "Sitting targets." His grip tightened on the hilt of his blade. "We're all right. He'll have to lose the cloak before he casts again. I just want to know what he's doing here." Ilka's face was set, his frown deep. Hired switched his gaze up to the keep and round the ramparts. Closing of the cloud hastened the setting of the sun, and the fading light washed grey across the castle. A light rain had begun to fall. All activity had ceased, and 100 eyes stared at the Raven and at the body they encircled. Tarrenspike Castle was quiet, and even as victorious soldiers walked back into the courtyard, their voices caught and faded when they saw the scene. The Raven's circle moved gradually outwards, with Ilka separate from it, always with one eye on the newly exposed wall. "How could he miss us with that spell?" asked Talon, indicating the debris of wood and grain scattered about them. "He was practically standing on top of us." "He couldn't," replied Ilka. "That's why The mage was by the wall." He had blinked into view with both his hands on it. They probed briefly, and a section of the wall moved back and left, revealing a dark passageway. The mage stepped into it, and immediately the opening closed. Ilka ran to the wall and examined the section minutely, the others crowding around him. "Open it then," said Harrod. The elf turned to stare at the barbarian, his leaf-shaped ears pointed at the top, pricking in irritation. "Can you open it?" asked Talon. Ilka nodded. "I'll have to cast, though. I can't see the pressure points otherwise." He switched his attention back to the wall, and the rest of the Raven gave him space. Closing his eyes, Ilka spoke a short incantation, moving his hands over the wall in front of him, feeling the mana trails sheath his fingers. Now he placed his fingertips on the stonework, searching. One after another, his fingers stopped moving, finding their marks. "Got it," he said. No more than half a minute had passed. The unknown nodded. "Good," he said, "but you," he indicated the stocky figure of Talon, his short brown hair matted with sweat and the old scar on his left cheek burning bright through his tanned skin. "Stay and get that cut seen to, and you," spitting the words at Richmond, "start the vigil and think on what you've done." There was a brief silence. Talon considered objecting, but the blood dripping from his arm and his drained face told of a bad wound. Richmond walked over to Ras, sighting down his long thin nose, tears in his pinched blue eyes. He folded his tall frame to kneel by the body of the Raven warrior, his sword in front of him, its point in the dirt, and his hands clasped about the hilt guard. He bowed his head and was motionless, his long blonde ponytail playing gently in the breeze. It was he, along with Talon and Ras, who had joined the Raven as an already established and respected trio 4 years earlier, after the only other battle that had seen the death of a Raven warrior, in this case, 2 of them. The unknown warrior came to Ilka's shoulder. "Let's do it," he said. "Right," said Ilka. He pushed. The wall moved back and left. It'll stay open. He must have closed it from the inside. There was light at the end of the passageway, wan and flickering. The unknown trotted into the passage, Hyrud and Surinder right behind him, and Ilka bringing up the rear. As the unknown warrior moved towards the light, a shout of terror, abruptly cut off, was followed by a voice, urgent and loud, and the scrabbling of feet. The unknown increased his pace. Rounding a sharp right-hand corner, he found himself in a small room, bed to the right, desk opposite, and firelight streaming in from a short passage from the left. Slumped by the desk and in front of an opening was a middle-aged man dressed in plain blue robes. A long cut on his creased forehead dripped blood into his long-fingered hands, and he stared at the splashes, shuddering continuously. With the raven in the room behind him, the unknown knelt by the man. Where did he go? Nothing. Not even recognition he was there. The mage, in the black cloak. Gods above! Ilka elbowed his way to the man. It's the castle mage! The unknown nodded. Ilka picked up the man's face. Blood from his wound trickled over gaunt white features. His eyes flickered everywhere, taking in everything and seeing nothing. Seren, it's Ilka. Do you hear me? The eyes steadied for a second. It was enough. Seren, where did the Zeteskian go? We want him. Seren managed to look half over his shoulder to the opening. He tried to speak, but nothing came out except the letter D stuttered over and over and over. Hold on, said Surinder. Shouldn't that wall let back onto... Come on, said the unknown. We're losing him the longer we wait. Right, said Hyrud. He led the raven through the opening, down a short corridor and into a small bare chamber. In the dim light from Seren's study, he could see a door facing him. He moved to the door and pulled it open onto another, longer passage, the end of which was illuminated by a flickering glow. He glanced behind him. Come on, he said, and broke into a run down the passage. As he approached the end, he could see a large fire burning in a grate set into the wall opposite. Sprinting into the chamber, he glanced quickly left and right. There was a pair of doors in the right-hand wall, perhaps 20 feet away, set either side of a second unlit fireplace. One of them was swinging slowly shut. There! He pointed, and changed direction, not waiting to see if any were following. His prey was close. Hyrud skidded to a stop before the door and wrenched it open, stepping back to look before dashing in. It was a small antechamber, set with massive arched double doors opposite. They carried a crest, half on each side. The walls were covered in runic language. Braziers lit the scene. Hyrud ignored it all. One of the big doors was just ajar, and a glittering light came from inside. The barbarian smiled. Come to daddy, he breathed as he ran through the gap and into the chamber beyond. Hyrud, wait! Shouted Surinder, as he, Ilka, and the unknown raced into the larger chamber. Get after that idiot, Surinder, ordered the unknown. Time to take stock, I think. Above the fire hung a round metal plate fully 3 feet across. On it was embossed the head and talons of a dragon. The mouth was wide, dripping fire, and the claws open and grasping. Otherwise, the room was bare of ornament. The unknown moved towards it, half nigh on Surinder as the warrior hurried towards the door through which Hyrud had chased. He stopped suddenly, glanced behind him, and frowned. What is it? Asked Ilka. This isn't right, said the unknown. Unless I've gone badly wrong, this ought to be the kitchens, and that end of this room, he pointed to the 2 doors flanking the unlit fire, should be in the courtyard. Well, we must be under it, said Ilka. We haven't gone down, said the unknown. What do you think? But Ilka wasn't paying attention to him anymore. He was staring at the crest over the fire, his face paling. That symbol. I know it. Ilka walked over to the fire, the unknown trailing him. What is it? It's the Dragonine crest. Heard of it? A few rumours, the unknown shrugged. So what? And you say we should be standing in the courtyard? Well, yes, I think so, but... Ilka swallowed hard. Gods, we better not have done what I think we've done. was the size of the hall he entered that first slowed Hyrid's advance, and the heat that assailed him the moment he was inside. Next it was the odour, very strong, of wood and oil, pervasive and with a sharp quality. And finally, the huge pair of eyes regarding him from the opposite side of the room that brought him to a complete standstill. "Gods! Hyrid! Calm down!" Surinder yanked open the door to the right of the fireplace and ran inside, seeing the crested double doors in front of him. He pulled up sharply, the dark-cloaked mage appearing suddenly before him. He raised his sword reflexively and took a pace backwards, realizing the mage's abrupt appearance was caused by the dispersal of a cloak-talk spell. Probably in his late 30s, the mage would normally have been handsome beneath his tousled black hair and unkempt short beard, but now he looked pale and frightened. He held out his hands, palms upward. "Please," he whispered. "I couldn't stop him, but I can't stop you. You're responsible for the death of one of the Raven, and I don't want another one to die. Believe me, the barbarian—" "Where is he?" demanded Surinder. "Don't raise your voice. Look, he's in trouble," said the mage. There was movement in his cloak. A cat's head appeared briefly at its neck, then disappeared once more. "You're Surinder, aren't you? Surinderlan?" Surinder, standing still once again, nodded. The mage continued, "And I am Densa. Look, I know what you're feeling, but we can help each other right now, and believe me, your friend needs help." "What kind of trouble is he in?" Surinder's voice was low too. He didn't know why, but something about the mage's attitude worried him. He should kill the man where he stood, but he was obviously scared by something other than the prospect of death at a Raven warrior's hand. "Bad, very bad. See for yourself." He put a finger to his lips and beckoned Surinder to him. The warrior moved forwards, never taking his eyes from the mage nor the slightly shifting bulge on one side of his cloak. Densa motioned Surinder to look through the doors. "Great gods above!" He made a move to go in, but the mage restrained him with a hand on the shoulder. Surinder turned sharply. "Take your hand off me, right now." The mage did. "You can't help him by rushing in." "Well, what can we do?" hissed Surinder. "I'm not sure," Densa shrugged. "I might be able to do something. You might as well get your friends. They won't find anything out there, and they could prove useful in here." Surinder paused in the act of heading for the door. "Nothing stupid, you understand. If he dies because of you—" Densa nodded. "I'll wait." "See that you do." Surinder left the antechamber at a sprint, not realizing he was about to confirm all of Ilka's fears. Hyrid would have run, only he'd come too far into the room, and anyway, he didn't think his legs would support him, they were shaking that badly. He just stood and stared. The dragon's head was resting on its front claws, and the first coherent thought that entered Hyrid's mind was that, from the bottom of its lower jaw to the top of its head, it was getting on for as tall as he was. The mouth itself must have been more than 3 feet across, the whole muzzle probably 5 in depth. Those eyes sat atop and at the base of the muzzle. They were close set, rimmed with thick horn, and the pupils were narrow black slits, ringed in a startling blue. A pronounced ridge of bone ran away over the dragon's head towards its spine, and Hyrid could see the mound of its body behind it, huge and shining. As he watched, it carefully unfurled its wings, and the reason for the size of the room became all too obvious. With their roots at the top of the torso, above the front limbs, the wings stretched to what must have been 40 feet on either side and flapped lazily. With the balance afforded by them, the dragon picked its head from the floor and stood upright. Even with its slender, bone-edged neck arched so its eyes never left Hyrid, it towered 60 feet into the hall. Its tail curled away to the left and was thicker than a man's body even at its tip. Stretched out, the dragon would surely have been well in excess of 120 feet in length, but now it rested on 2 massive rear limbs, each foot carrying a quartet of claws bigger than the barbarian's head. And it was gold all over, skin glistening in the firelight and sparkling on the walls. Hyrid could hear its breathing, slow and deep. It opened its mouth wide, revealing long rows of fangs, and saliva dripped to the floor to evaporate on contact. It raised a forelimb, single hooked claw extended. Hyrule took an involuntary pace backwards. He swallowed hard, sweat suddenly covering his body. He was quaking from head to foot. "Fuck me," he breathed. Hyrule had always believed that he'd die with his sword in his hand, but, in the moments before the huge claw dismembered him, it seemed such a futile gesture. A calmness replaced the instant's fury that had itself so quickly followed his fear, and he sheathed his blade and looked straight into the creature's eyes. The blow never came. Instead, the dragon retracted its claw, unarched its neck, and moved its head down and forwards, coming to a stop no more than 3 paces from Hyrule, hot, sour breath firing into his face. "Interesting," it said in a voice that echoed through Hyrule's entire being. The barbarian's legs finally gave way, and he sat heavily on the tiled floor. His mouth was wide, his jaws were moving, but no sound came. "Now," said the dragon, "let's talk about a few things." End of chapter 1. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed that. Tune in sometime in the next few days for chapter 2. Leave a comment, subscribe, whatever. Just enjoy the story. So, James Barclay, check him out. So, this is Henry Q signing off.